Hi everybody, welcome to the August monthly meeting for Camcycle. Thank you for tuning in online, or if you're watching this meeting at a later date, which is one of the good things about putting everything online. It means that if you couldn't join us on Tuesday evening, you might be watching us on YouTube or Facebook later on. So thanks for tuning in and watching our meeting. This evening, we are talking about working for change, and that's a great theme. It's the same theme as our upcoming autumn magazine for Camcycle, which is also all about working for change. And what we're doing this evening is we are handing over our platform to 5 inspirational local campaigners who are working in their local communities to make change. And we've worked with all of these people to help with the cycling parts of what they're working on. But I think also for us at Camcycle, we've learned a lot from all of the people that we'll be meeting this evening as well. So let me, as I said earlier, turn this into the Brady Bunch. I think it's working. Probably not while I'm sharing my screen. So I'm going to take that off. You've seen what we're about, and let's say hello to all of our wonderful guest speakers this evening. Excellent. So let's all wave. We should all be seen online right now. So joining us this evening, we have got Andrew Milbourne from the Hurst Park Estate Residents Association. Hi, Andrew. We have Nick Finer from the Cycle Safety in Storey's Way campaign. Hi, Nick. We're joined by Rosalind Lund from the Arbury Road East Residents Association. Hi, Rosalind. Someone we have met before is Susan van der Ven from the A10 Cycling Campaign. Hi, Susan. And we have Dan Strauss of the Save Your Cycle Route, hot off the success of saving his cycle route on Adams Road. So thank you for joining us this evening to all of our guests, but I will now stop rabbiting on while I wait for people to join us on Facebook. And I will hand over to Andrew, who is going to tell us all about the work that the Hurst Park Residents Association has been working on. So Andrew, take it away and share your screen.
Okay, well, thanks very much. I'm Andrew Milbourne, so I'm here as the chair of the Hurst Park Estate Residents Association, but I'm a member of the Cycle Campaign, so I'm probably a bit more sympathetic to the Cycle Campaign than the average person. And I've been commuting by bike for 50 years since I was about 10. So the Hurst Park Estate is an area of 1930s semis, mostly off Milton Road, next door to Rosalind in Arbury Road. And it's probably quite an affluent area, and most of the problems a lot of people would think were probably of the kind of first world variety, really. So if we look at the kind of origins of the estate, I've been here for 30 years, but there was really no need for a residents association because nothing really changed. But the big driver behind it was the proposal from Milton Road development, which everyone in the locality considered to be really bad, because basically they were going to bulldoze the whole lot, get rid of all the vegetation, build a load of bus lanes, so it would be basically like an urban motorway rather than a suburban road. So a lot of us in the area got together, so that included the Milton Road RA, and of course, crucially, the Cycle Campaign. And of course, even though we made some progress on that, context of Cambridge kind of doubling in size and the detrimental effects of poor development, traffic and growth have meant endless issues to deal with. So our mission is to strengthen the community and protect and enhance the physical character of the estate. So every resident's a member, and you don't have to pay any money to join. You can join anyway. And it doesn't matter whether you're an owner, occupier or a tenant, which some other RAs make as a requirement. So that's okay. And we have a committee of 8 who are elected at the AGM. Our main kind of mechanism for doing things is through our councillors, but we have no formal status, so we're very reliant on their kind of goodwill, really. And also we work with FECRA, which is the Federation of Cambridge RAs, who try and deal with things on more of a Cambridge-wide area. So if we talk about the Milton Road project, I mean, Matt Daniels, who I gather is here, can probably say equally or more about it than I did. So the organisations who didn't like what the local government were doing got together, and Matt came up with this brilliant alternative plan, which includes really good cycle lanes and, you know, landscaping and vegetation. So we kind of went to the relevant people, and we had quite a lot of discussions, and then we came to kind of a compromise whereby they still had a few bus lanes to keep them happy, but as you can see in this kind of design, we still got a lot of landscaping and some really good bike lanes, but they had to get some people in from Holland to try and understand how the bike lanes would work, because the people who cost £1 million couldn't actually hack it, which is quite amusing. So then they agreed on the compromise, and at the end of the day, the project was actually justified on the benefits of what the community had done, which was the cycling benefits were at least 95% on the bus lanes. So that was kind of a big success all round. So since then, we've had a number of projects. I divide them into sort of defensive and positive ones. So things which I consider defensive, we're still kind of dealing with aspects of the detailed design, although we've got a good relationship with the project manager, which that's kind of always a key thing. There's developments all the time, so like 10 flats being built on where one house was on one of the avenues, and obviously that has an impact in terms of parking and all that kind of stuff. And you can't replace that many houses with 10 flats before you've got major congestion. There's the North East Cambridge development, which I'm sure you're aware of. It's going on to consultation. So basically it's like Ely's been plunked into North East Cambridge. It's going to have a massive impact. And, that's pretty worrying that despite a lot of rhetoric, it basically looks like Brookgate doing something like CB1 on steroids. And we're grappling with commuter parking. We've got about 70 commuter cars parked in the area and struggling to deal with that. Problems with through traffic, which is this is where some of our problems overlap with Cycle Campaign. On the more positive note, we've provided a lot of social support during lockdown, which I think people have appreciated the moral support, at least if they didn't need any practical support. We've got a number of social events, like Sunday you had people walking around the estate to meet people and that kind of thing, which people like. We've got a gardening and landscaping group to try and improve actually doing gardening in the area. And of course, we're working, with Rosalind and her comrades on the Arbury Road traffic filter, which is a very live and controversial issue at the moment. I'm sure she'll be saying more about that. So some of the issues we have, in an RA is fine when you've got an external threat like Milton Road or a big development, but internal projects tend to have winners and losers, and they doing quite simple things can be quite controversial. So, putting in a park bench you might think might be quite good, but then people say, oh, I don't want people hanging around outside my house and all that kind of thing. Some residents can be a bit car-centric, so there's then a sort of conflict between those of us who are kind of more sympathetic to cycling and people who are more car-centric, and that's kind of come to the fore with the debate about the traffic filter in Arbury Road, where it's been difficult for those of us who kind of see that as a good idea to do as much as we like, because we've got other people who, rightly or wrongly, kind of disagree with us. Decision making tends to be by consensus, so that can make decision making difficult, even though in theory it can go to a vote, but that tends not to work. And we have no formal role in local government, so as parish councils, may seem trivial, but they do actually have power. They have to be consulted about planning issues. They do get a budget that they can deal with, and councillors and officers have to actually deal with them. So we can be totally ignored by councillors and officers. Although fortunately we've got a couple of very good councillors, but we've also got a couple who seem to do very little indeed. So that's the way in which local government works, but you're very dependent on it. A lot of them have got full-time jobs, so can't, there's a limit to what they can do. We don't get any direct funding. The engagement from the state can be patchy until there's a particular problem that, affects particular individuals. Only half the estate are actually on our email list, for instance. So that can be a bit frustrating. But of course, as soon as people don't like something, then they're kind of hopping up and down quite a lot. People tend not, in my view, to see the bigger picture. So when we first started having problems with parking, we could have had a parking scheme to deal with it, but people kind of thought, well, it's not that bad. But then obviously things got a lot worse due to the growth in traffic, and then it's now we can't actually do it. So things I'd kind of like to see generally to make things better. Well, for the cycle campaign, I'd kind of like to see cycle campaign maybe try and persuade people like motorists that cycling is a good thing and it benefits them. I have residents who outright hate cyclists, and you get the general rant about cyclists don't pay road tax and all this, blah, 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 blah. If people have views about things, they have views, but if we could at least try and get some of the facts right, it would be good. I think there needs to be a bit of preaching to people who aren't converted, if that's possible, to try and win them across. It would be good if we could get parish council status, or the mechanism for doing that appears to be virtually impossible. I don't want to get too much into the details of local government, Byzantine organisation, but they used to have a committee called CJAT that dealt with traffic in Cambridge, and they got rid of it on the basis that they have parish councils to deal with that level of consultation, but of course in the city we don't have that. So if we did have that status, then we'd have to be consulted and would I think have more say, and that's a problem. Obviously, you're aware of all the different structures and how Cambridge isn't particularly well represented at the county level where they make a lot of the decisions. If councillors did have a lot more work in terms of personal resources and people to help them with things like doing surveys and background research and that kind of thing, because they got a full-time job and it's very difficult to kind of deal with that kind of things they have to do. It'd be good to see some consistency of effort from some of the ones who don't do so much, but at least there's a bit of competition between the two main parties in Cambridge, which gives us a bit of hope. It would be good for FECRA, who are the people who kind of deal with this stuff at Cambridge level, to have more resources and clout to try and deal with the huge amount of development. I mean, I think the cycle campaign actually has more turnover and full-time staff and that kind of thing. So it really needs to be kind of beefed up to that level to kind of make some sort of impact on that kind of thing. And also, I think the university are probably the only people who can really make an impact on some of this development. They've only got the people who've got a clout at the national level and can deal with the fact that the playing field is massively tilted against the people who merely actually live here. I kind of need to realise that if this continues to kind of damage the quality of life in the city, it is going to eventually hurt them, because people won't want to live here, and that will affect their way of doing things. Okay, so that's me.
Thank you, Andrew. That was excellent. And I think it's really nice to see how the Hurst Park Residents Association has developed over the early days when we started working together on Milton Road campaigning, and to see all the other things that you're taking on is fantastic, and some good ideas in there, but we'll touch on that when we all come back together for our panel. But next up is Nick Finer from the Cycle Safety on Storey's Way, and I'm sure many of the people watching this video would have cycled on Storey's Way to get out towards West Cambridge. So Nick, over to you.
Thanks very much, Roxanne, and it's a great pleasure to do this brief presentation, very much on behalf of the other members of the group. It's quite a small group. And it started about 6 years ago when those of us living particularly in the cul-de-sac part of Storey's Way realized that what was already a pretty dire situation in terms of safety, with people coming through the bizarre width restriction that exists, that with the development of the Northwest Cambridge site, now known as Eddington, that this was likely to get very much worse, particularly if the Ridgeway, well, as the Ridgeway has developed and is being increasingly used. And again, not just by sort of, if you like, singleton cycles, but by cargo carriers, tandems, tricycles, all feeding in down a slope where it comes into the cul-de-sac in Storey's Way, and then through the width restriction. Let me just see if I can advance my screen. So Storey's Way, as you know, sort of provides a sort of dogleg link between Huntingdon Road and Madingley Road. And the bit that really is problematic is here around the width restriction. It's not to say that there aren't difficulties with car parking and large lorries coming through on their sat-navs and then getting stuck. But it was where the new Ridgeway feeds in, if you can see my arrow, into the cul-de-sac that was, we thought, likely to be a problem. And so we started to have discussions with the Cambridge Cycle Campaign, who agreed that there were serious problems. Now, Storey's Way does have a very active residents association, and that had already been looking at traffic problems, but very much through a, if you like, purely Storey's Way perspective. And we felt that it was important to try and get a group together that would involve not just residents, but perhaps even more importantly, cyclists, colleges, councillors, members of parliament, and users, if you like, or stakeholders in what was going to become a major through route. So at the end of 2014, a small group of us formed what we called Cycle Safety in Storey's Way. And the plan that we had was to try and put together an open meeting for all stakeholders. And we started to arrange this, and we were lucky enough to have good support from Professor Nikki Padfield, who at that time was Master of Fitzwilliam College. And she agreed to chair the meeting and also to make facilities within Fitzwilliam available for this open meeting. We held the meeting at the end of January 2015. It was chaired by Professor Padfield. Julian Huppert, who was the then MP and chair of the all-party parliamentary group on cycling, was there and gave a talk. Heather Topel, who was the project officer for the Northwest Cambridge site, gave a talk. Dr. Phil Trethan, who's a resident, gave the background to some of the safety issues, as well as myself. And then we also had the chair of the Storey's Way Residents Association Traffic Committee, Marcus Smith QC, who also gave a talk. And the objective of this meeting was to encourage information exchange and fact-finding, to present the current situation, and most importantly, to outline future changes and challenges. It was very successful. We managed to get 70 people attending the meeting. We issued press releases which got into the local papers. But then after the meeting, with feedback from the meeting, we put together what was a very detailed report, which we were then able to circulate in March 2015. The report ran to, sorry, this was the meeting here. It went on, in fact, a little bit beyond 9 o'clock. And the report sort of was based on these different areas of concern. I've talked already about where the Ridgeway comes into the stub of Storey's Way, the width restriction here, but there were also big problems at the junction with Huntingdon Road, this corner outside Fitzwilliam where there had already been a major accident of somebody turning right, a cyclist trying to turn right into St Edmund's College or New College, and then also where it joined with Madingley Road. The report contains some good pictures and some of the flows, which are very confusing, of cyclists, particularly through the width restriction. You can see the sort of problems of lorries getting stuck and cyclists having to fight with these enormous juggernauts. And the report was, I think, very valuable. I'll come back to that a bit later. I'll leave it on that. So after the meeting and with the dissemination of the report and the publicity, the action then mainly continued through the Residents' Association rather than through the Cycling Safety in Storey's Way. And that was partly because actually two of the members, Harriet Gillis and Sue Finer, were on both, if you like, committees. And the real, I think, outcome from our work in the Cycling Safety in Storey's Way was then the success of the Residents' Association this year in getting a grant of £100,000 from the Transport Block funding allocation, which was to review traffic control measures, particularly with reference to improving cycling and walking safety in the road. And this funding will cover professional advice, consultations with residents, colleges, and other interested parties, and then most importantly, implementation of any agreed changes. And I don't think that that would have happened just through the Residents' Association without the work of this very much broader, if you like, involvement of stakeholders in the cycling safety group. We believe that that groundwork was almost certainly instrumental then also in Storey's Way being one of the streets designated now for emergency closure under the new COVID initiatives to encourage walking and cycling. So that's a very brief sort of history, and I suppose I'll just end by what lessons have we learned. Well, the first is that a very small group can have a very large influence by involving all stakeholders in the work that we did. We would like to think that we took a very professional approach and that this sort of, if you like, professionalism, particularly in terms of the report, was pivotal. We also did a lot of detailed reading of council documents and regulations and used the opportunities through those. But of course, that does take time. And lastly, we felt that the production of the report following this open meeting had a huge clout and has still proved very useful. So, for example, over the emergency COVID regulations, we've been able to recirculate that report to councillors and other interested parties to show that if you like, and to update or to remind them of the work that is there behind the closure, and perhaps as a preemptive strike for what undoubtedly will be some pushback during the consultation period. So thanks very much indeed. I will stop sharing and I will mute.
Thank you so much, Nick. That was great. And I think, again, really interesting to see how your group then fed into the Residents' Association. And I think we're starting to see a bit of a theme here, but let's see where we go with our next speakers. So next up is Rosalind from the Arbury Road East Residents' Association. And I believe this is a fairly new group, or it seems certainly new on our radar in terms of the things you're working on right now. But I'll let you talk about it, Rosalind. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, some of the background for our Residents' Association is the same as it is for Andrew's, because the sort of stimulus, well, in recent times anyway, was very much the Milton Road plans. There had been efforts to have some sort of a Residents' Association earlier, but they haven't got very far. So in 2016, we realised that there were two residents' associations going already, the Milton Road one and the Hurst Park Estate. And we realised that their interests weren't actually exactly the same as ours, because although we're a residential street, very much so, and we've got the famous 20-mile-an-hour limit, nonetheless, we felt that it was important to have our own voice. So in 2016, we met together in one of our members' houses, and we mostly met in their house for quite a long time, but we did join FECRA. And then we, Matt from the Cycle Campaign said, well, you know, if you want to get on, really, you've actually got to get yourself properly legal as a residents association. So in December last year, we're a bit of a latecomer, we got ourselves properly set up. We had a public meeting. The Baptist Church in Arbury Road have been really helpful. And we got ourselves an elected committee. And of course, we haven't managed to have an AGM since then because of COVID. So we kind of started from almost nothing in a way, but there are a lot of people who are keen cyclists in Arbury Road, at least Arbury Road East End, which is interesting because Arbury Road is a mile long and it runs from King's Hedges at the sort of Histon Road end, from King's Hedges Road through to Milton Road. And the City Council a few years ago gave us a most wonderful cycle route, but it ends just outside of the recreation ground and the North Cambridge Academy. We all complained about this. I mean, it was one of our initial difficulties with what was going on, because at that point the road narrows quite considerably, and it was the easy option to stick in two very nice cycle lanes, one on each side of the road, new hedge, all beautiful. But then you get directed down what was a footpath, down the side of the recreation ground and into the Hurst Park estate. But that has not, of course, stopped all the cyclists coming down the whole length of Arbury Road. I mean, we are actually a main cycle route. We go down to the new cycle bridge. I call it new because it's new to me, newish anyway. And people go up to Newmarket Road, to the Tesco's, and into town. It's a preferable route for a lot of people to go into town that way. But unfortunately, at our end of Arbury Road, not only is the road itself narrow, the front gardens are very narrow. Many of them have no chance of parking on their front gardens. And so the parking's in the road, which forces cyclists to cycle down the pavements. The pavements are also very narrow. And those of us with children or grandchildren or the elderly take their lives in their hands when they just walk on the in the pavement because of the cyclists zooming down. And I've been knocked off my bike when I came out of our driveway by the shops, and a cyclist was zooming down the pavement. So I know myself exactly what it's like. So when we had this meeting, many of us felt very keen that there should be some way of making it safe for people to cycle on the road. So I think quite a number of us were quite keen on the idea of blocking the road off in some way. And a few years back, we did have the experience of a blissful few weeks when they were doing gasworks or something, and the road was closed and everybody had to go round, and people managed. I mean, it wasn't the end of the world. So one of the first things we did as a residents association was to do a questionnaire and find out what people thought. And of those who took part in the questionnaire, the majority of people, when they were given options of what might happen to the road, the modal filter idea which is where you close the road to all the vehicular traffic, but except for bicycles and pedestrians and a few other things, you have emergency access of some sort. But the idea that was suggested to us by our councillors was that we could very easily put in planters or something as a temporary way of finding out what people thought, how they coped with it, etc. So when the government, with the COVID lockdown being let up, as it were, suggested that these modal filters were a really good idea, it just seemed like manna from heaven to us. It was exactly what we'd been asking for. So we did press to get in the first tranche. We thought we were there, support from councillors, but unfortunately, I'm not sure what's happened, but anyway, we are not in the first tranche. In the meantime, we've done a lot of traffic surveys to try and work out exactly what's going on in our road. Because since lockdown was released, the Histon roadworks have started. And that seems to have given the shakes to some of the councillors, because that means that there is traffic that would normally come down Histon Road to get into town is now having to find another way. And then obviously some of them are using Arbury Road. So that's something that we have been trying to work out what's happened to people, and I'm sure some of them have gone on to the Lees Road little rat run there. And we would really like to stop that. So I think all the things that go with a residents association, we have felt. So as soon as we had lockdown, we, like the Hurst Park Estate, we were ringing people up, sending leaflets and offering help. But it seems that at the moment, the support of the cycle campaign has been crucial to us, and we're very lucky to have Matt Danish actually living in our part of Arbury Road. So his advice has been absolutely crucial. And we are working very hard to try and promote this idea of a modal filter. The idea being, of course, that it's something you try and the consultation takes place afterwards. This is an idea that some people really can't get their heads around. They feel that they're affronted, I think, that they haven't been asked about it, but the government aren't giving us time to have a consultation first. And in any case, a lot of the experience on the continent suggests that actually it's much better to do it and find out then what the problems are, because then you can work around them perhaps or discuss with people. And we have calculated that for most people in Arbury Road, if they do have to, if they want to get to the other end of Arbury Road in a car, we do have some elderly residents, it will probably not take more than 5 minutes extra. And even in the height of the rush hour, it's unlikely to be more than 10 minutes extra, which for a very short journey is not a problem. It's the Residents Association is a very positive thing, I think, for all the people who are part of it, because Arbury Road isn't an easy road. It divides from north to south. And I think that's another thing that we hope will be mitigated anyway if we get this modal filter. I think probably that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalind. That was really excellent. And I hope you get your modal filter, and we need to find out why it didn't happen and how we get it for you in the next tranche. But I think it's just really inspiring to see residents saying, please, can we have this in our backyard, which is really great. All right, Dan is up and running and sharing his screen, so I won't hold you back. It's now over to Dan Strauss from Save Your Cycle Route, Adams Road. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you very much, Roxanne. Well, in August last year, we were told by the Greater Cambridge Partnership that they wanted to use Adams Road for the final stage of the Cambourne to Cambridge busway. That came out of the blue. The facts and data were our starting point. The first thing we tried to prove was that Adams Road wasn't just some sleepy residential street, but a major cycling route. So we asked the GCP for up-to-date figures on the number of cyclists who use the road, but they admitted that they hadn't counted the cyclists, pedestrians, or the cars for 9 years. So we counted them ourselves, and our figures proved that cycle use was 91% higher than the GCP thought. And it was the busiest peak time cycle route in Cambridge. The road has transformed as the West Cambridge site has developed. And so armed with these numbers, we set out to make the case that an 8-metre wide road was totally unsuitable to safely contain 6,000 cyclists and 280 buses a day. The other key thing I think we learned was the reading, and I think Nick has referred to this. You've got to do the background research, painful though it is. Try to immerse yourself in the topic, or get a team to take individual topics to immerse themselves in. When the GCP said that using the rifle range track would mean there was no space for pedestrian access, if we'd done our research, we'd have known that their own proposals included pedestrian access, but they were lost somewhere deep in a set of papers released 18 months previously. Similarly, an eagle-eyed supporter spotted this innocent paragraph in the papers submitted to the executive board, adding the X5 buses to Adams Road. That's 62 extra buses a day, never consulted on or mentioned by the GCP, just this tiny paragraph in a 280-page document. The politicians, I thought, were absolutely vital to the whole campaign. These are the men and women who will make or break your campaign. Most of them are highly committed and accessible. They listen to arguments, many reply to emails, and even the ones that don't reply often send your email to senior officers. A Freedom of Information request revealed this, as you can see. Working with politicians also guarantees you exposure. A newspaper photographer will turn up if he knows the local councillor or MP is coming. One other thought, don't make enemies. Politicians in key roles move around a lot, often very unexpectedly, and a lowly committee member one day can suddenly be elevated to the role of chair. Supporters. I found this the most tricky part, trying to bring everyone on side around a central theme. Everyone has a different opinion, a different agenda, even cyclists, even people living in the same street. And we've heard other residents' associations experiencing similar issues. In the case of Adams Road, cycle safety, though, was the key. Everyone recognised the central flaw in the GCP's argument. Adding 280 buses a day to the busiest cycle route in Cambridge would be deadly for cyclists, and there would be no cycle lanes. But there's no substitute for expertise, and here we were very lucky to have Matt Danish, who's obviously done so much work across the city on these individual campaigns, who was on hand to provide advice, often at a moment's notice. We also crowdfunded to get a traffic consultant and a planning consultant to write reports. The media. Well, what can one say? It was the great unknown for us, but obviously had to be a vital part of the whole exercise. Posters are fun to create. They can be very eye-catching and help spread the message, but they are lousy for getting people to stop and engage. Social media, however, is amazing at getting people to engage. It's no surprise that every political party in the world is obsessed with social media for one simple reason: it works. And adding powerful images the moment you capture them, live streaming from GCP presentations, uploading Freedom of Information requests the moment you receive them, all these are possible with social media. Twitter has a more limited, that was Facebook, by the way. Twitter has a more limited audience range, but those people that have it are very influential. It's particularly good for communicating with journalists and getting the occasional celebrity endorsement. But turning Mary Beard's 250,000 followers into signatories to our petition was another goal altogether. Most importantly, good Twitter and Facebook visibility leads into radio, newspapers, and TV coverage. Whilst very few people will listen, read, or see that initial coverage, it can be sent far and wide via Twitter and Facebook. Finally, we tried to make all our media link into our petition, which became the centerpiece of the campaign, and finally achieved over 3,300 signatories. And earlier this year, we were very happy to hear that the GCP had changed the preferred route option. But as you know, the C2C busway is on hold until the Mayor's office and the GCP can agree on the overall route. But to keep the momentum, we commissioned Lucy Marstrand to reimagine Adams Road as a vital cycle route whose capacity will need to double to 12,000 cyclists a day in the next 10 years as the West Cambridge site doubles. Hopefully, this will mean Adams Road will be safe for future generations. And that's that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. And that was great. Another perspective on how to effectively, in particular, effectively communicate the issues that your campaign group is working on. Right, we're now over to Susan van der Ven for the A10 cycling campaign. It's been a while since we've had an update, so please tell us what you've been up to.
Thank you, and I hope my hope that my PowerPoint is adequate as it shows on the screen. Anyway, thank you very much for inviting me. And I just wanted to say it's inspiring to hear. Oh, sorry. No. Yeah. Okay. There we go. Right. Yeah. It's very interesting to hear about the neighbourhood campaigns in Cambridge and the very localised work. And I was particularly struck by Nick and Dan's presentations in terms of the importance of engaging local stakeholders and your key movers and shakers to make these things happen. So I'm a county councillor in the Melbourne area, and so I think I'm the only one of the group today talking about a campaign outside of Cambridge. So our campaign, the A10 Corridor Cycling Campaign, started up in 2013 with a very focused objective, which was to join Cambridge and Royston with safe cycling. And that's a 16-mile route, which had no cycle path at all. It had a couple of old tracks on the side, such as the one that you see here in this picture, but otherwise nothing. The reason we felt that we had a chance to develop a cycle route along this corridor stemmed from the 2001 census, which was being looked at in developing the Cambridgeshire Local Transport Plan. And what the census showed was a higher than expected rate of cycling to work in this corridor. And the corridor is characterized by lots and lots of employment sites in the different villages and in Royston and Cambridge. So there's Melbourne Science Park, for example, and this means there's a very good population for winning the cycle to work argument. So we had the census and we have the employment sites. And then at that time, when there wasn't so much funding around for cycling and the city deal, which became the Greater Cambridge Partnership, didn't exist yet, what was noticeable was that anywhere within a 6-mile radius of Cambridge was more likely, was eligible for more funding than areas further out. So Foxton, right in the middle of the geography. I'm going to try to, there we go. Foxton, right in the middle of the route, touches that magic 6-mile radius. So we figured that we had a chance at getting something. So the route was scouted out by Sustrans and the County Council, and we had some very good advice from Jim Chisholm about cycle campaigning and how to set up a campaign. And we got started, and as a councillor, I have to say it was the most enthusiastic group of people from all over the place that I'd ever met, determined, and people with a lot of self initiative, and I guess that is what cycling is all about. So as you'll see here on the map, these colors represent segments of pots of funding that we won bit by bit by bit, starting with the yellow between Shepworth and Foxton, which might seem a strange place to start, but there was some leftover money somewhere, and if you could access a railway station, you could tick the main box. And we thought if you start in the middle, then we'll build up a case to join up either side, which is a kind of a dysfunctional way to design a strategic route, and you do end up with problems. But this is the only way that cycle infrastructure could be funded at that time that we were aware of. So our job was to play the game. And after Shepworth, some funding came into the picture for Foxton to Hurston, and then Hurston village itself, and then the city deal. I think it was still then the city deal. Their first actual spade in the ground anywhere was the green segment you see there from Melbourne to Shepworth. And the winning argument for that was that it leads up to Melbourne Science Park, which was running out of car parking space. And I will always remember the letter from the MD at TTP, the owner of the science park, saying that the work profile for our recruitment is someone who is young, will work long hours, and wants to bike to work, wants to get that exercise on the commute. And I can't overemphasize the importance of getting employers and businesses and organizations that employ people behind a campaign, because travel to work is a really big force, and it's proven to be the case for us. So I have chosen just 3 photographs to try and exemplify the main issues that we have had to tackle. So this picture is taken on the roundabout at the junction of the A10 and the A505 at Royston, and it also marks the county boundary between Cambridgeshire and Hertfordshire. And it is a place where many people live who then go to Cambridge to work, or to Melbourne, or somewhere along the A10 corridor, many at the biomedical campus. So it's a part of the natural geography. And getting a crossing, a safe crossing over this roundabout is absolutely sort of critical to our campaign. And doing so means working together politically across that boundary. And so we have spent a lot of time nurturing relationships between the local authorities at all levels, getting to know the businesses in Melbourne and Royston, which is a sort of a key little mini segment in the overall picture. The person here with the blue bike, Stacey, he lives in Royston and works at Phillimore Garden Centre in Melbourne. And that is, he's one of thousands of people who will be cycling this route. So there we are all together, and my colleagues in the back row, we're councillors on either side of the county border. And here we have a photograph taken at a small business in Moulton, a hamlet between Meldreth and Orwell, that makes scenery for theatres in London, set up scenery. This was our 100th local business to endorse the cycle path, and we took a letter to the City Deal board to demonstrate the strength of support. The big businesses on this letter were AstraZeneca and all of the partners at the biomedical campus. So we went and knocked on all of the doors we could find, business doors. And today we have financial support from 4 of these businesses toward the bridge between Melbourne and Royston that we're hoping will be built. Probably a couple of hundred, let's see, about quite a lot of money. And then we worked with our schools. Here we have a student from Melbourne Village College who lives in Royston and attended a couple of Greater Cambridge Partnership meetings, board meetings. We also have junior travel ambassadors from the primary schools who've attended these meetings, and for them it's an amazing experience to take part in democracy. And you know, these meetings can seem like another planet, and it's been a lot of fun to hear their own reactions and also their sense of achievement, because on this day, this is Sambor, and I think at this particular meeting, he seemed to persuade the board that Royston, even though it's in another county, is actually part of our cycling geography. So that was a really good day. And there's Mike Davies over there from the cycle team, who some of you will know. And this is the first kilometre of cycle path between Shepparth and Foxton, which I mentioned earlier. And when the path was going down, we were challenged by local residents to do something interesting with the verge, rather than just let verge grass grow, verge grass that the council can really not afford to cut anymore. And we actually seeded miles and miles of verges over the years, and this wildflower on this with wildflowers and with a sustainable seed mix. And I only mention it because this got us into the whole question of maintenance. So we're all vying for funding to be spent to create these cycle paths, but there is no dedicated fund for maintaining even the vegetation other than the 2 grass cuts a year. So we were very lucky. We had a generous grant from AstraZeneca to help deal with the vegetation. That won't go on forever though, and we're going to have to think what we're going to do, because you can see all these trees and hedges along the side. We don't want them to take over and wreck the path. So we have work forever ahead of us in dealing with maintenance. And back to the map, you'll see the pencil bits at the top and the bottom. Those are important stretches of path that are going to be created by the Melbourne Greenway, which was approved on the 25th of June by the GCP. And this is a project that will take all of these segments and pull them together. And it will also deal with junctions between the segments that are, very important and currently not complete finished products. And you'll see that we've underlined Melbourne and Foxton because those 2 villages will have work done through the high streets, including the possibility of 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, work on junctions, and so on. So we're looking forward to completing the route, and then, well, we want more. There are spurs from the villages to the A10 corridor, and what would be really great to see, and I hope it will happen now with the realization that we need more cycling to create true networks. So I'll stop there. Thanks. Oops.
Thank you, Susan. That was fantastic. And it's so nice to see all the pieces of the puzzle of your cycle route coming together at last. And congratulations on the Greenways funding as well. Excellent. So we are all back together now, and we are awaiting the questions from our audience. So there's a slight delay. So do any of you have a question for someone else in the group we've got here? I've got a few, but I'll let you have the opportunity. Yes, Andrew, you're muted, but go ahead, ask your question.
Yeah, it's a question for Rosalind. I just wondered, with all these, you know, great cycle campaigners around, is there anything they could help with the Arbury Road filter campaign at the moment? You know, like writing to the Ian Bates and Steve Count and people like that, maybe.
Well, we have been. We've been writing to, many of us have written to Steve Count. We've written to all our own local councillors. We were slightly slowed down on writing to Steve Count. I think Ian Manning felt that he's our county councillor, that his work, which was going on behind the scenes, might be put at risk. And then, of course, there's all the matter of how things are dealt with by councillors or officers. So local politics can be quite complicated, can't it?
Yes. Dan, yes, have you got a question?
Yes, it was really to Nick Finer. Nick, did you have any issues with your local residents associations regarding the imposition of the modal filter?
Yes, it's been quite an interesting few weeks. I guess so. There was the Residents Association undertook a traffic survey some years ago and undertook a sort of consultation and vote within the street. And there was a very small majority looking for for closure of Storey's Way to a modal filter, if you like. And we, in fact, from the Residents Association, had an external traffic consultant give various options. But it was a very contentious issue, and there were some people who were very seriously opposed to it on the basis that it would inconvenience them having to either go out to Huntingdon Road or Madingley Road. When the emergency measure closure came through, the Residents Association were accepting of road closure, but rather misrepresented actually the views in a letter they sent to the Greater Cambridge Partnership. And so from the Cycling Safety in Storey's Way group, we actually were able to, if you like, give pushback to the Residents Association. So I think one cannot assume that residents associations necessarily will be as cycle friendly or as cycle focused, if you like, as a dedicated cycling group. In fact, I mean, almost certainly they won't be, because as we heard earlier, there will be people who don't like the idea of doing anything to inconvenience cars of residents who are in the street. So yeah, I mean, at times there's been a sort of an uneasy relationship, I would say, with the Residents Association, although all at the moment has been resolved amicably. I think the real issue is going to come with actually the colleges. Of course, you know, there are several colleges who are within Storey's Way, and they have been, I mean, extraordinarily coming out with statements such as the road can't be permanently closed. How will people be able to drive to work?
Okay, we've got some questions coming in from our live viewers. So let's move on to some of those. And the first question probably draws on something from your presentation, Susan, and it'd be interesting if anyone else has had this. Engaging with young people, what has worked for you? Have any young people, students, done school coursework or projects on any of your patches? So we heard from what you're doing, Susan, but what about for any of the other groups? Have you worked with students? Or would you like to? Because we could potentially help introduce you to some people to help with that. Yes, Rosalind, yes.
Well, I think actually that is something we would be very interested in doing. One of the difficulties over the last few months has been that, of course, nobody's been at school, but we do have a school, a secondary school on our road. And I think we would be really interested to get some opinions or studies done by students of Cambridge North Academy.
Excellent. Something for perhaps when they get back to school to think about, or a project while they're at home, potentially.
Well, maybe, yes.
Yeah, but I guess it's hard to get a realistic reflection of normal travel patterns at this time, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so another question from Anthony Carpin. So of course it's a question about young people. It's always from Anthony Carpin. But he also asks, with lots of new homes being built, new communities will continue to form. What advice do you have for people who are starting from scratch based on what you've been through? But I'll add to that, in my street, in my area, there's no residents association. So I'm quite intrigued about, you know, how do you actually get started? Any advice, Susan?
I think Nick just someone just made the point about the Residents Association has many different objectives. And what I found is to campaign specifically on cycling is critical. So we also have bus and rail groups, but they're different people. Sometimes there's some overlap, but a cycling campaign needs to be very specific. And so I would keep it focused in that way. Does that answer the question?
Or also about how do you get it started? What's the spark that starts something from happening? Do you think you need to have a cause that people are drawn to, or is it just about saying come to the pub and meet up and let's get talking?
I think you need to be very specific. You need a clear objective. You need a geography, and you need to do some research to understand what possibilities might exist. And if you can get some advice from, I would contact your local councillor and get some advice from the council and from the local authority and the cycling team on how this might fit into the bigger jigsaw. And because then you can focus on winnable goals. And I think that's important. And someone also said, don't make enemies earlier. So play, sort of play to win. And that means get your ducks in a row and then start.
Nick, what would you like to say?
Well, I mean, we've been in Storey's Way for about 15 years, and there was already a very well-established residents association. I mean, I think there are several things that can help be the nucleus. One is obviously some sort of planning application that everybody is opposed to. That's always a great cohesive force. In Storey's Way, there was a lot of work done it must be about nearly 10 years ago now, getting us designated as a conservation area, which was really very helpful in preventing some what would have been disastrous developments on the corner with Huntingdon Road and in the end of the stub where it goes into the Ridgeway. The second thing is obviously there is, I think, a social aspect, and we have taken in turns to host a street party every year, which is also, I think, a very positive side of things. But as I say, I think for specific issues, there is no reason why one can't have a parallel organization. And it is interesting because I think that for those of us who live in the cul-de-sac part of Storey's Way, we have a very different perspective on the issues affecting cyclists to people who live in the, in the main part of the road. They just don't see the problems and the issues of cyclists trying to get through the width restriction, lorries getting stuck, and so on. So I think that, and we just felt that, if you like, the stimulus was the developments in the Northwest Cambridge site, which was clearly going to have a huge impact. So change, I think, in the situation is probably one of the important stimuli. And I think, there's nothing to just stop you doing it. It's easy to start. Clearly, the transition that people have made to having some formal status is a second step.
Yep. Any other comments on that before I move to the next question, or tips or advice about getting started? Nope. Excellent. Okay. Our next question. And they're starting to come in now. So we've got some advice actually about the Stevenage Cycle Campaign is a good one to look at. So they have lots of tips. Worth having a look at that, and the inspiration from the A10 Corridor Campaign about combining with train and bike and so on. We have a question here from Tom. Have any of the groups considered direct action campaigning? And if so, what? Or what are your thoughts about not doing direct action? So for people watching, when we say direct action, that's about saying, for example, we want a modal filter on our street and we're just going to go and put something in there to show people what it's like, perhaps outside of what the council is doing. And there's sometimes, borderline issues around what is allowed and not allowed in terms of direct action. So have any of you thought about doing something like that?
No.
No.
Sorry.
Councillor, what are the reasons that you would say direct action isn't something to consider?
I suppose we know what we want to achieve, and we have tried to put together the tools for doing that. And there is actually a lot of support there's increasing support for active travel. I think things are a little chaotic right now with the emergency funding. There's no chance for consultation, and it makes it very awkward because elected people are accountable. And but I think it's better to try and bring people together to work together. A fight doesn't usually end up. I don't know that will achieve a lasting result. It might make a point, but there's also there's a very polarized world out there in terms of anti-cycling. So it's important to make the case, I think.
Yeah. Any other comments on direct action, or perhaps even big mass cycle rides or walking, protesting, anything like that? Are we all working with the system at the moment? Dan?
I love the idea of stunts. With our campaign, it was very time limited, and I was desperate to think of ideas. And I did have one idea, but got cold feet about it, and that was to hire at relatively low cost, actually, 2 double-decker buses and get them to park in the road, because that in a way would make our argument better than any bit of publicity or Facebook post or whatever, just to see on an 8-meter wide road 2 double-decker buses, and just think what that would do in terms of cycle safety. But I chickened out because I thought actually if something went wrong, it would be a complete disaster. But it was very, very tempting, and yeah. So that's. But I love the idea of a spectacle. I mean, you guys did that brilliant cargo bike ride through town. I mean, that to me was a fantastic thing. I mean, I'm still seeing images of that, however many months on that is, and because I think campaigning can be quite dull. I mean, it's quite boring, isn't it, just to see another poster and another Facebook post, but really, something that really punches, very exciting. So I would be on for helping anyone come up with exciting ideas. As long as I don't have to execute them, I'm very happy.
I guess in some ways, sometimes direct action happens for us. So Rosalind, you said that the gasworks closing the street was a moment that helped people to see what things could be like. So you didn't have to do the action, but it came to you, but it was a moment to give people inspiration. Andrew, you've had your hand up. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't officially sanctioned, but one of our residents decided to literally lie down in front of the bulldozers when the council wanted to demolish a fence. And he lay there all afternoon, and he wasn't going away till they got the officers around and told him that they consult about it. So it was absolute textbook stuff. It was utterly hilarious. It got on the front page of the Evening News, which I saw on holiday in Madeira. But yeah, it's easier if someone else does it. If one of the organisation had done it, I think it would have gone down a bit badly. But.
Yep, understand. Right, we've got more questions, so I'll move us on. We have had a question from Twitter. If your village has an inadequate bus service and one of your secondary school-age children is dyspraxic, so you can't cycle together, how do you get into Cambridge without a car? But I'll just say for this that we completely understand that not everybody can cycle, and particularly for the cycling campaign, it isn't about making everybody cycle. It's about finding the journeys that can be cycled, the people who can cycle, focusing on that so that we create the space for people who can't cycle to have those car journeys, or to free up road space so buses can run more efficiently. But perhaps, Susan, you're from not Cambridge, as we've mentioned, so do you have a perspective on, for the people in your community, how they feel about getting into Cambridge if they can't cycle?
Yeah, firstly, I absolutely agree with you. Cycling is for people who are able to cycle and want to cycle. The paths that have been constructed are non-motorized user paths. So we have a lot of other types of contraptions on those paths. They're very heavily used by a wide variety of non-motorized users. That's one thing I would say. And then in terms of rural isolation, it is a huge, huge issue. And I do represent a couple of villages with, they don't have this luxury of being able to cycle in, and they have almost no bus service. So it's terrible. And I really sympathize.
I think actually we're all allies in this, because we know for cycling, if we need to free up road space, that means public transport needs to work effectively. And for public transport to work effectively, road space needs to free up, so that supports cycling. And you could cycle to your bus stop or to the train. So we are all actually on the same side here of trying to make our roads work more efficiently. And perhaps those alliances, and I know that, Susan, you've done this well with the train groups and so on, those alliances can help with your campaigning as well. Right, on to another question. From Anna, so this is our comms officer, so excellent question from Anna about how have you reached out to the different members of your communities, and do you feel that you have a good representation of local residents in your groups? Anyone want to share a comment on that?
Well, I mean, I can say that our communications have been, I suppose, in relationship to circulating the report that we drew up following our initial open meeting. And since then, which obviously went to a very wide audience and continues to be sent out to anybody or at times when it's important. But otherwise, our communications have probably been mainly through the Residents' Association.
Mm-hmm. Rosalind, yes.
Yes, we've had some people who have been quite vociferously anti the idea of having a modal filter, and we have done our very best to make sure that our communications with everybody in our part of Arbury Road have been as good as possible. And so we've done a mixture of using our website and using leaflets. Our most difficult problem has been with one of our blocks of sheltered accommodation. And actually we found it extraordinarily difficult to even be sure that the leaflets were actually getting to the people we wanted to see them. When we've managed to speak, and obviously you'll appreciate that COVID has not helped at the moment, but when we have managed to speak to people, because we've been out in the road doing a traffic survey or something, we found that the people we've spoken to have understood what we were saying. But the difficulty is that people don't always read things properly, even when they are provided with, you know, what we think is a clear explanation, and they just jump to certain conclusions. And actually it really is one of the reasons why you have to do some of these things. You have to try doing them and then see how they go.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Dan.
I just wanted to say that one of the, we've talked about Facebook, posters, leaflets, emails, reports, but actually standing on a street, stopping cyclists, chatting is incredibly powerful and I find it quite terrifying, but that in a way is the best communication I think that I experienced is people that would never have signed a petition, never have written to a councillor, stopping them, talking to them and suddenly explaining the situation to them, and it opened up a completely new connection. But it takes a really good team of people who are committed and aren't embarrassed by that. And if you choose your road, I mean, all the roads we've talked about, people are desperate to talk. Well, not desperate to talk, they're keen to talk if you stop them and communicate. So I think the more of that, and going along with the more 21st century methods of communication, but there's no substitute for a good chat.
Yep, absolutely. So another question that we've had is from Edward, and he asks, in the general local population of residents, what would you estimate would be the fraction supporting a general statement such as councils should encourage people to cycle by favouring cycling in road space allocation and transport budgets? So I guess it would say, before you get to the specific happening on your street, just would you broadly support this? We tend to find people are supportive of that, but when it comes down to, well, that means this will happen on your street, that suddenly the opposition starts to come out. So do you feel that there's maybe that general support, but it's not translating into the technical things that might happen?
The general support would be, I think, universal in the Storey's Way Residents Association.
Yeah. I think some people, as I was mentioning earlier, don't even get the general support. I mean, they can't hate cyclists, so that's probably about 20%. There's probably about 20% are actually cycle themselves and are pro-cyclists, maybe a bit more than that. And there's probably a proportion who are kind of pretty apathetic about it, really. Don't consider it's that important until it crops up, and then they may have strong views on it. But.
Yeah. Rosalind, yes.
Yeah, it's not, I don't like the way that's phrased, actually, because I think pedestrians are actually a really important part of the whole mix. And if you talk about cyclists as if they've got to take priority, you get an awful lot of elderly people, especially, but families with children, getting really anxious about it. And certainly for us in Arbury Road, the need is to protect the pedestrians at least as much, if not more, than anybody else. And I think if you do that, if you say it's for the most vulnerable groups, then I think you actually get a lot more support.
Absolutely. And we hear this a lot, you know, cycling on pavements is a problem, but people are cycling on pavements because cycling on the road is a bigger problem. And actually, we need to make it safe for everybody. It's not cyclists versus pedestrians, it's cyclists and pedestrians both deserve something better here, isn't it? Okay, I'm going to get to the point where we start wrapping up, and I've let us go well over time, but you've all been saying such fabulous things. I just wanted to let you all keep going. But what I've been doing while you've all been talking is trying to find the themes that I think are leading to success in the work you're doing, or the things you've been saying. And I must say, something was mentioned by just about everybody, and that was Matthew Danish. So he can say Matthew Danish has been really helpful. Yes, so I think we all have to just say, you know, a big thank you to Matthew Danish, who's been doing so much amazing campaigning work for Camcycle and supporting so many local groups. To be frank, I don't know how he does it. So just a big thank you, and it just shows how for Camcycle, you know, we can collect this amazing technical knowledge, but we don't necessarily have the local knowledge or the local connections. So by partnering with organizations like yours, you know what you want, but we might be able to tell you the policies that you need to help make that happen. So I think that was coming out of your talks, the way that Camcycle's interacted with you and key people over the years. You know, we mentioned Martin Lucas Smith as well and Jim Chisholm, but I just know that Matt seems to be everywhere at the moment, and I'm getting support for that as well online. More people saying, yes, Matt's helped me. So a big thank you to Matt there. Something else that I was coming out from your talks was data. And I think most of you have done some kind of data collection, either through surveys or traffic counts. How important do you think that getting that data is? Andrew? Oh, Andrew's had to go. Bye, Andrew. From anyone else, how important has data been to your campaigning? Rosalind?
Yes, I would say it is essential, because it means that we can give some actual statistics to the councillors and the officers, which we certainly hope will back up our view and campaign for what we want to achieve.
Yeah. And I guess even for Dan, it was the petition with so many signatures. That's a fairly strong data point, isn't it?
Yes, but I think the biggest one for us was this crazy idea that the GCP didn't count the bikes, and the data was 10 years old, and that was really, I mean, that was so depressing, because if you're the organisation that is paid to count bikes, to come up with a traffic scheme, why don't you count them? And in fact, there was actually one of their weakest moves was the delay. So although they announced it in August, that they were going, August 2019, that they were going to use Adams Road, they only counted the bikes on the 31st of October 2019. So for 3 months they were saying, yes, of course we're going to count them, yeah, any moment now we're going to count them, even though we've decided to send the buses down here any moment. And it was absolutely a sort of revelatory that an organization that is, you know, supposedly carefully planning things and doing its research just failed totally to do that.
Yeah. Susan, did you have a comment on that as well?
Yeah, some of the best data we've had has come from large employers who have been willing to plot their employee postcode data and tell us where their commuters are coming from, and the numbers, the proportion of their workforce coming in by bike, and that's been very powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, I think data is important, but it's actually not easy to collect high quality data, because, you know, sort of variations from a day-to-day basis. I mean, we did do a lot of that in Storey's way, but actually in some ways, I think equally important or equally effective is actually photographic evidence of the sort of catastrophes and disasters or potential disasters and problems that exist. I think, you know, that actually sways minds sometimes as much as actual data. I mean, I hate to say that, but
yeah, and I guess that tied in with another theme that I was coming across from all of your groups was the professionalism and the quality of communications and explaining these issues. And it's so great when you have a range of people from across our community who come online and go, oh, the modal filter here, and the, you know, the just using all the technical jargon as well. But I'm sure that you found that when you're talking to people in your communities, you've had to really explain what that means and communicate these concepts. And particularly, you know, when we get very complicated diagrams from the councils, what does that even mean when in practice? And it's up to local people to actually explain that in ways we understand. And I would say thank you so much for coming along tonight and communicating with us about all the great work that you're doing. I have a feeling lots of lessons have been learned for other groups that are just getting started. And there's lots of them at the moment in response to COVID. So I'll just say a great big thank you to our wonderful guest speakers, and for everybody at home, we'll have some virtual applause. It'll be delayed a few seconds, but it will appear. And by all means, I say hang around for the next 15 minutes if you'd like to watch our further updates, or by all means go and have a cup of tea. You all deserve it. But thanks for joining us today. Awesome, thank you. Okay, everybody, bear with me while I get up the next little bit of updates for this evening. So some great things happened last week, and we were all a bit surprised because we started out the week in the Camcycle office with a bit of a plan, and then we had the government announcements of the gear change report and vision, and I'll get onto that. And then by the end of the week, we found out that the opening of the Fendon Road roundabout would be happening on Friday. So our whole week was distracted by all the good news, and I tell you what, it was a bit overwhelming, but worth it all. So here we are, our Dutch style roundabout has arrived in Cambridge at last. And I just thought that the people watching at home who potentially can't get down to the roundabout to check it out for themselves would like to see some photos. A little reminder, this is what we had before. Just looks like a standard British roundabout, but we know that it was not safe and there was a fairly high casualty injury rate on this roundabout. Something certainly had to be done. There we go. I think we've even got some pavement cycling there, which isn't surprising if it's unsafe. I'm skipping through. This is a bit of a presentation from something else, but I can point out that some of the ingredients to make this roundabout happen in Cambridge were already being prepared in Cambridge. So things like the parallel crossing on Huntingdon Road, that was the first one in the UK, and it proved that we could have a parallel crossing and therefore apply this to the Dutch style roundabout. We also had the Radigan Road roundabout, which, while billed as Dutch style, probably wasn't really that much of a Dutch roundabout. As you can see, people choosing to ride on the road instead of using the shared use pavement. But what this gave us was the geometry that led to a proper Dutch style roundabout. So I say we got the ingredients and we were finally able to cook up a Dutch style roundabout for Cambridge. And here it is. So let's hope this video plays. Thank you to Matt for this excellent video. Okay, that was the first Dutch style roundabout in Cambridge, day one. And while it looks like we lined up lots of cyclists to try it out, actually that was a lot of people just making their usual journey through the roundabout while we were filming and celebrating. But I think that we need to have a huge thank you to all the people that helped make this happen. So the officers at the county council who worked on this for a very, very long time to make this happen. And I know it's clearly been a stressful project bringing something this different to Cambridge for the first time. So a huge thank you to the officers who have continued to push for this to happen, to the councillors who've been really brave in supporting a project like this, and to the Dutch Cycling Embassy and the Dutch cycling consultants who also helped to make it happen. So a huge thank you to all the people who brought this to Cambridge. And of course, a thank you to the Cambridge Cycling Campaign for helping to pave the way for support for this level of Dutch style infrastructure. So if we were all together again, we'd be doing a big round of applause together and a big celebration, because it really is such an amazing moment. And I must say, after my first few laps around the roundabout, I had to get off my bike and jump up and down, because I was just that happy to have that kind of cycling experience right here in our own backyard. I'll just touch on a little bit of the other news that we have had over the last week. So the government has surprised us with their changing gear report, and there is just so much that was announced last week that I'm not even going to be able to go through it all tonight, and I'm still trying to read through it and understand it. But I would say that check your email inbox for our weekly update from last week, and for the weekly updates coming along this week and next week, because we'll be drip feeding summaries of everything that was announced. And also check out our website and our blog, because we're continuing to put up posts, but there's a lot to be working through. So what did we get? Well, we had from the Prime Minister the Changing Gear Vision book, I suppose, where they really outlaid a number of amazing policy promises for cycling. So of course, the one we always like to hear about is design standards. And so with this announcement came the Local Transport Note 1/20. And you can see that in the diagrams on the right of this slide, which just shows some of the standards that are expected. And these are the things we've been campaigning for so long. From now on, if local authorities want their cycling and their transport projects funded, they need to be meeting these standards. And that is things like cyclists must be separated from pedestrians. Cyclists must be treated as vehicles, not as pedestrians. Routes must feel direct, logical, and be intuitively understandable. So we don't have to go around the back alleys anymore. You know, we should be seeing some sensible, direct routes. Purely cosmetic alterations should be avoided. And note the paintbrush there. That means no more painted on cycle lanes. If you do that, you won't get funded. And we've seen that already with the government's emergency COVID transport funding. Painted cycle lanes will not be paid for. And that's something that will be permanent now. And we're also seeing things like cyclist dismount signs and barriers are no longer allowed. So these design standards are quite fantastic. The kinds of things we've been campaigning for. Of course, there are some bits that we'd like to see improved, but this is huge. But of course, we say that this infrastructure has to meet these standards if it will be paid for. Of course, local authorities could just decide not to do anything. So that's a challenge, or they could decide to do things that are substandard from their own funding, potentially. But what we have is also the active travel commissioner who will be looking at these schemes and auditing them and be a statutory consultant. So local authorities will be held to account, and the wording that we're seeing around these things is quite strong. So let's see who this active travel commissioner will be and what they hold local authorities to account for. Plenty of other announcements came in the Changing Gear vision document. We're seeing cycle training for anyone who wants it, subsidies for e-bikes, so many schemes. So I do recommend popping onto our blog and having a read through all of that. I'll be here all night if I keep going through it. But what we also had last week was the Sustrans report about cycling for everyone, which probably got lost in all the fanfare around the government's announcements. But what we're seeing here is there's just so much underlying demand for cycling, and definitely in groups that we just haven't been giving enough consideration to when we're thinking about our cycling campaigning and our infrastructure and the areas in which we need to see it. But we're seeing a number of people who are not associating cycling as something for them, but who would actually really like to cycle. So ethnic minority groups, 55% do not cycle, but would like to start. And I think something for us to think about as campaigners is how are we reaching out to these groups and helping people to get involved in campaigning, to get what they need in their communities, but also to say that, yes, you're welcome and we're here for you too. So for women, and again, this is UK rates, so we know that we have high rates of women cycling in Cambridge, but I'm sure that this does reflect there are still people who are not getting involved. 31% of disabled people would like to start cycling, but as we've seen, we need the right level of infrastructure so that it is accessible. But really great, this report is huge and we just haven't had time to read it because of everything else that came out, but some really, really fantastic insights for our campaigning. We also had the Bike is Best campaign release some fantastic statistics just over the last few weeks, and through a YouGov survey, and I'm really pleased that they invested in doing this survey. And what we've seen is that for every person who is against measures to enable cycling in their local community, 6.5 people, 6.5 people, sounds a bit strange, but 6.5 people support local improvements. So I think we need to remember that, because sometimes when we're campaigning, it feels like there's a lot of very loud voices saying they don't support this and that we're ruining their communities. But we need to remember that there are 6.5 people there who are maybe being a bit quieter, but do actually support this work. So have strength and reach out, as we've learned this evening, reach out to the local community and find those people and help raise their voices. So this Bike is Best campaign, great statistics, and they do have a petition that you can sign as well. That's it. That's my announcements for today. I'm sure there's a lot more, and if we were all together, we'd have 10 hands up saying that they've got updates. So I'll give it a few minutes in case there's anything anyone wants to say on the social media comments. Otherwise, I will wrap this meeting up and send us all to the virtual pub. Our next monthly meeting is School Streets, and it will be timely because September, we are assuming that schools are going back. Of course, anything could change, but we do know that if schools are going back, we're going to have some real challenges if public transport and buses aren't running. We need to make sure that children can get to school safely. School streets will be a hot topic. So please come and join us for our School Streets meeting. This is something we need to be working on as our campaign. Thank you, everybody, and have a great week, and go check out that roundabout if you can. Bye.